What's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul with Liberty Hill Comics, where I share my passion and over 40 years of experience comic book collecting, investing, and conservation with you. Today, we're continuing our new comic book conservation project on this copy of Powerman and Iron Fist number 73, the Rom SpaceKnight crossover, which is the first meeting of Rom, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. Published by Marvel Comics September of 1981, it's got this great Frank Miller cover. This copy belongs to friend of the channel, Mike Michalowski, whose YouTube handle is Hugo Danner. Mike asked me to have a look at this newsstand copy from his collection and see what I thought we could do with it. And I decided it might be a good project to demonstrate how our conservation techniques can be applied to modern books. In episode 1, we did a thorough assessment and developed a game plan for this book. Essentially, we determined that while this comic book presented pretty well at arm's length, it had some flaws, including color-breaking spine ticks, soiling, and stains, that would result in the book grading out in the 5.0 to 6.0 range as it sits. Our hope is to address the soiling and stains through dry and wet cleaning methods and stain mitigation if necessary. This comic book appears to have 7.0 to 8.0 potential if we're successful in our endeavors. I've created a playlist for this conservation series, so check that out if you missed episode 1 and want to view it before we get started today. Today we're going to dry clean the cover of this comic book. I've started by creating a good ergonomic workspace. I've adjusted my ring light so that I can sit with good posture with feet flat on the floor, and I can get a great view of the comic book without hunching my back over or holding my breath. My ring light has great LED lighting and 10x magnification. Good lighting and magnification are a must. CGC is going to use these tools to grade your book, and if you are not using them to prepare your book for grading, then you are missing flaws that they will see, and you will wonder why the book you thought was a 9.0 comes back an 8.0. I'm starting with clean and dry hands as always, and my trusty Pentel Click Eraser. This is a white PVC eraser, the sort you're probably familiar with. It is smooth and relatively soft, meaning it crumbs off with very little effort. It has a diameter of 6.7 millimeters, or just slightly larger than 1/4 of an inch. Mars Stadler sells a similar one, which I find to be a tad bit more abrasive and in my hands sometimes lifts the gloss from modern comic books. Although I do really like the holder of the Mars Stadler, which is a bit nicer than the Pentel. The Pentel Click Eraser is my go-to tool for comic book dry cleaning. You can cut the eraser with a razor or scalpel either straight or at an angle to provide a relatively sharp point if you need it. What I'm doing is working around the white areas of the cover, spotting soiling with my view through my magnification ring light, and very gently working the eraser over them to lift them. The first thing I do is rough in all the erasing with the Pentel Click Eraser. Then I switch to smaller erasers. These are used for tight corners or smaller patches of white on the cover, where I might be concerned that the Pentel eraser is just a bit too large and clumsy and might lift some ink. I'll go over each of these erasers in detail. One step down in size from the Pentel eraser is my STL eraser. At 3.8 millimeters diameter, it's about half the size of the Pentel eraser, and although it's also a PVC white eraser, it's a bit more abrasive and does not crumb off quite as easily. Use it with a bit more caution, but it's great to get into tighter areas where you're concerned you may lift ink with the Pentel eraser. The next step down in size is my Mono Zero eraser by Tombow. This is an ultra-fine 2.3 millimeter diameter eraser for pinpoint erasing in really tight corners or tiny strips of white on the cover. With respect to abrasiveness, it's in between the Pentel and the STL erasers. But because it has a much smaller surface area, it can create dents and imprints in the cover, so make sure you use very low pressure with this one. Regardless of which eraser you're using, you want to use very light pressure. Just glide the eraser over the soiling gently. It's much better to gently go over an area multiple times than to use more pressure and go over it fewer times. It takes more time, but you get a better result and you preserve the gloss. This is just tedious work. You need to get in here and do it. As you can see, I used the Pentel eraser for the bulk of the work and jumped to the smaller erasers for spot work in tight areas. I tried to avoid areas with colored ink because all three of these erasers can easily lift ink from the comic book. The Pentel, with its relatively large size, is a rather crude tool, and it can easily lift ink if you're not careful. That said, it is the softest of the three erasers, and it's possible to gently use the Pentel eraser on areas with ink without lifting the ink, but the key word here is gently. The best way to get feedback on how well you're cleaning is to watch the eraser crumbs as they come off the eraser. If they come off discolored, then you're lifting something off the comic, whether it's soiling or ink. Once the eraser crumbs are coming off white, you know that you're no longer lifting anything off that area, and it's time to move on. With the Pentel eraser and very gentle pressure, you can erase over areas that have ink without lifting the ink. If you're unsure if you're lifting ink, check the eraser often for the presence of colored ink. It may seem like I'm moving around the cover a little bit haphazardly, but in fact, I have a plan. I start with the largest white areas and the Pentel eraser, and I'll either go through the whole thing with the Pentel and then come back with the finer tools, or sometimes as I work, I see areas where I need a finer tool, and I'll just set the Pentel down and pick up one of the smaller erasers. Then I'll continuously scan the white areas and go back over them and see if I missed anything and re-hit it. I'm also scanning the entire book on the areas with ink and noting any areas in the ink where I have soiling. Once I'm completely satisfied that all the white areas are cleaned, I'll move on to the next tool. This is a kneadable eraser like you may have been introduced to if you took an art class in high school. It's great for gently dragging over large areas that have light soiling. It can be used on areas with colored ink. The trick is to gently drag it and to check the surface of it regularly to ensure that you're not picking up the colored ink. You'll see it on the surface of the eraser when you check. I like to use it in the UPC box because it gets in between the little black lines and where not even my Tombow will reach. Last minute checks to see if there's any other soiling I missed with an eraser, and then it's time to take a cotton round, just wipe the whole surface down. This will get rid of any eraser crumbs, any debris I might have missed. You also can feel with the drag where you may have deglossed the cover a little bit, and you can rebuff the cover to restore some of the gloss. I also check my cotton round surface regularly, just to make sure I'm not lifting any ink with the cotton round, which can sometimes happen. Having done all that side, it's time for me to clean my workspace so that I can flip this comic book over and I don't put any eraser crumbs or any other debris right on this surface. And then we'll get started on the back. Now I use the same tools on the back of the comic book as I use on the cover front. but I use a little bit of a different process. Because you ordinarily have a white gutter all the way around the back of the comic book, all four sides, and you typically have an ad which has a lot more white space than the comic book cover typically. I have a little bit of a different pattern that I follow, and I normally start on the staple side on the bottom, and I work counterclockwise around the book. I'll start there, I'll give it one pass, then I'll inspect, and I'll either come back and hit areas again that need them, or I'll move on, or I'll move on to my smaller erasers for tighter areas. I'll continue this way counterclockwise or anti-clockwise for our friends in the British Isles. And I'll just turn the corner and keep working. Regular inspection of your eraser will make sure that you are not pulling ink, and you want to support the paper. So note here, I'm going to pull toward the spine, and I'm supporting it with my left hand with my finger and my thumb. When you get to the edge, you want to pull always away. Here I found a little tiny piece of debris, and I could feel with my finger that it was raised, so I knew it was something on the paper. So I'm just going to remove that with a pick. Then I'm going to come in with my tight STL eraser, because there was a little bit of soiling from where that debris was. Then I'll go over it with my Pentel. Now you're going to see me use a tool that many comic book cleaners and pressers will tell you not to use. This is a Pentel high polymer block eraser. Use this with caution, but when you have larger areas with light soiling, this is a great time-saving tool because it quickly covers a lot more ground than the click eraser. I support the paper on either side of the eraser, and I very gently drag it along the paper surface to remove soiling. This is that nice soft Pentel polymer eraser that crumbs easily, so you really don't need much pressure. When you get to the edge of the comic, you don't want to erase back and forth because you will risk creasing or ripping the paper. You want to gently pull in one direction off the edge of the page, then lift the eraser, move it back to the paper, and gently drag back off the edge again until you have all the soiling removed. Only pull off the edge of the paper, never push back into the paper, or you will risk creasing or ripping your comic book. After having successfully removed the bulk of the soiling with the block eraser, I'm coming back in and I'm just touching up that edge with my click eraser. And I've had my click eraser flake off here, and that's because the edge of the holder is actually kind of sharp. So I'm going to take a scalpel. In this case, I'm going to cut it pretty much at a 90. And sometimes we'll cut it at an angle. Kenny Sanderson sort of famously cuts his at about a 45. I think he prefers the Mars erasers for Golden Age books mostly. Now that I have this at a 90-degree angle, I'm going to go ahead and click it back out again. And I can use it like this, sort of perpendicular to the paper. And I can see, it's blocked a little bit here for you, but I can see very closely when it's perpendicular. I can see very precisely where the edge is and make sure that it's not going to touch that blue colored area. And then it's time to round the corner. Now sometimes these pages have a little bit of overhang, and this is what I do when they have a little bit of overhang. I just create a little ripple in the page, and then I hold that paper back so that it's flush with the rest of the interior of the comic book. If you don't do this, when you're erasing along this edge, you'll actually create a little crease where the cover overhangs the rest of the book, and we don't want that. So with my left hand now, I'm holding the page back. The cover, again, has a little ripple in it, a bubble, if you will, so that it doesn't overhang. Always keep your workspace clean, though having those eraser boogers around sometimes can assist in getting other surfaces clean, but we've already cleaned the front of this book, so I don't want extraneous eraser crumbs on the front of this book. So I'll hold this cover back, and the gutter on the left and right of the book are thinner than I'm comfortable using the block eraser, which is why you see I did the spine side and I did the open readings edge with the Pentel click eraser. Notice also here, this is more gentle work. I'm pulling toward the edge, toward the corner again, gently. I don't want to use the block eraser here because I want to take care to really not put a lot of pressure and to not create a crease or a rip close to that corner. So again, I'll just continue to work anti-clockwise. I'll switch back to the block eraser here. Again, gentle is the name of the game. If you're pressing hard enough to make really large eraser crumbs, or if you're pressing so hard that you're lifting all of the soiling with one pass, then you're using too much pressure. Lighten the pressure up and you'll see smaller eraser crumbs resolving, and you can monitor whether the eraser crumbs are coming off the eraser dark or whether or not they're coming off white. Once they're rolling off white, you've removed all of the soiling from that particular area that this particular tool will allow, and it's time to move on. Because the eraser is larger, it's also a little difficult to judge exactly where the edge of the eraser is, and it's easy to erase ink with this tool. So I purposely stay a bit off of the colored graphics, and I intend to come back and hit that edge close to the colored graphics with my Pentel click eraser or one of my smaller erasers. My click eraser still has a nice sharp 90-degree cut to it, so by using it at a 45-degree angle, I can actually get very close to the printed graphics here without concern for erasing any of them. Now that I've got the gutter all the way around the book done, you'll see I'll start getting a little bit finer detail. Here I'm actually inside the orange dotted line, and I still have this sharp edge to my Pentel click eraser. After a little while of erasing, of course, that'll go away because it'll be eroded down. And I can either cut it again or I can move to one of my smaller erasers. But it helps to keep the edge flat and thereby sharp if in the areas like this where you have a larger area to erase, you turn the eraser back perpendicular to the paper, because then it'll erode obviously flush, square. Now when I'm working on these areas really close to the ink, I'm gonna I think you can probably tell just by the motion that I'm very gently dragging. And I mentioned before, this Pentel eraser can, if you're gentle enough, go over inked areas without lifting ink, but you really need to moderate the pressure that you use. So as I approach those areas, I lift so that I'm not using as much pressure, because I don't want to have a faded ink area where I've gone over with this eraser. So now I'm going to work through the rest of the ad systematically, hitting the white areas inside the gutter, This inner tube is an area, and the TV screen is another one you want to check. And then, of course, the areas in the coupon and the printed ad material. When you clean books, you usually spend way more time on the rear than on the front of the cover, just because there's usually so much more soiling on the back. There's so much more white area. It shows up much more prominently. And unfortunately for those of us that spend a lot of time cleaning books, sometimes the same ad ran for months or even years across dozens or hundreds of titles. So you look at the same ads over and over again. At least the covers, they changed month to month, and they were obviously different title to title. But the backs can get pretty monotonous if you're cleaning for any period of time. Particularly if you focus on a specific era of book like Bronze or Copper Age, you'll see the same ads over and over and over again. So note, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on that stain. I already know it's not going to dry clean up. And also, the gloss there may already be compromised. I really don't want to spend a lot of time working on it when I know it's not going to be productive and where I might actually disrupt the gloss. Whereas if I just kind of leave it alone, we may be able to get some stain mitigation in and preserve any gloss there. Now I have my little Tombow, and I'm just scanning the whole cover for any tiny little slashes of white where this Tombow will do a good job getting in an area where I was less comfortable, either with the click eraser or with my STL eraser. I'm just about done with dry cleaning. If you want good pressing results, being fastidious with your workspace will pay dividends. So before I move on to a cotton round, I'm going to clean my hobby mat and the comic book of all the eraser crumbs and any other debris that may be present. You'll be surprised how the tiniest eraser crumb will embed in the cover of a comic during pressing and leave an impression and require you to repress the book. Of course, with this comic, we are moving on to wet cleaning next, but the same rationale applies. Once I'm satisfied there's no foreign material on the cover, dry cleaning will be complete. Next episode, I'll disassemble this comic book and wet clean the cover. After wet cleaning, we'll assess if we need to take stronger measures for stain mitigation, so that'll be a game day decision, episode 3. I sincerely appreciate you joining me today for this episode of this modern comic book conservation project. Most of the dry cleaning materials I featured today are available from Amazon in the affiliate links in the video description if you need any of them for your own conservation efforts. If you enjoyed this video, please take a few seconds to give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. Let me know if you think we'll be successful with that stain removal or you think we're crazy. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Until next time, take care of one another.